Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. And I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, 2024 NFL Draft Week is here. And here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover it wire to wire. If you have missed either of the two previous episodes, please go back and check them out. Matt Wallman, as always, giving us tons of takes, dropping knowledge on so many of these prospects. And then the last episode, David Syvertson of Our Lads coming on, talking about the wide receivers and tight ends in great depth. But here we are, the week of the NFL draft. I'm going to have 3 episodes for you leading up to the NFL draft, and then wire-to-wire coverage each day of the NFL draft, recap show every single night, Dynasty Rookie Ranking show dropping by sometime Sunday night or Monday morning. But to set the stage, final ranking show, which we're doing tonight. Tomorrow, a My Guys episode, offense and defense. And then third before the NFL draft, projecting the NFL draft, where I kind of talk about who I think is going to come off the board in round 1, who I think is going to come off the board in the first 3 rounds. And that's coming directly off of the 2024 Saturday to Sunday Premium Draft Projections Notebook, which did launch last week. So now all 3 notebooks are immediately available if you purchase them. Remember, it is $9.99. You get access to all 3 notebooks. You get the scouting notebook, which almost 100 detailed player profiles, strengths, developmental areas, functional areas, how they win, NFL role, NFL scheme fit, fantasy spin. Then you get the rankings notebook, which has all our rankings and tiers on our film analysis for the 2024 offensive guys. Also has our Devy rankings. After the draft, it'll have our immediate Dynasty rookie rankings. And then also a couple weeks after the draft, it'll have updated full Dynasty positional rankings. So if you're looking to do any startup drafts or just kind of compare the rookies to other guys in the league, that will be updated as well. And then the recently launched Draft Projections Notebook, the thing that I work on more hours than I care to even discuss, but it's got almost 400 players in it, snapshot of how they win, some developmental areas, their measurements, if they had combine testing numbers, projecting how I expect them to come off the board based on everything I'm hearing, reading, listening, watching, tabs for every position, offense and defense, and then a projected top 32 board, a projected top 100 board, which is rounds 1 through 3, and then a projected all 257 picks in the NFL draft. Our track record on those big board tabs has been fantastic. For people who don't know or who are new to the listeners, last year we predicted 27 of 31 round 1 prospects for 87%. We predicted 86 of the 102 prospects to come off the board in the first 3 rounds, which was 84%. And then we also predicted 217 of the 259 prospects to come off the board in rounds 1 through 7. So 87% hit rate in round 1, 84% hit rate in rounds 1 through 3, and an 84% hit rate in rounds 1 through 7. We have been anywhere between 80 and like 87% on those numbers since we created the Draft Projections Notebook. It is as good as a resource out there for draft weekend to kind of see what the consensus. I don't take a consensus from just anybody. The information that I gather is from the people that I think are legitimately the best in the industry in terms of predicting the draft, and I morph them together, create these projections, and it has had tremendous success from everything I'm reading, listening, and hearing of the right people. I think that's where you got to keep in mind. You got to be listening to the right people. You got to know who to be listening to, whether it's beat writers, whether it's national guys, in terms of gathering this information, who we think come off the board in the first 3 rounds, and all 7 rounds of the NFL draft. So with that out of the way, go over to S2S Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. For $9.99, you get access to all 3 notebooks. If you've been a longtime listener of us, I'm kind of urging you a little bit, guys. Please consider purchasing the notebooks if you have not purchased them in the past. It's $9.99. It's literally the cup of like a cup of coffee and a donut or a sandwich in the morning. It goes a long, long way of helping us to continue to do what we do here. We understand there are so many great resources out there, some free, some paid. But everything that we get is just to keep us going here, to pay for the server fees, the subscription fees that we need. Everything that we get from the sale of the premium notebooks is just to keep everything away from a paywall in terms of the podcast, in terms of any of the coverage we provide, and this to continue to do what we do here. So if you've been a long-time listener, never purchased it, please, if you can, consider purchasing it and helping us out tremendously. If you've purchased it in the past but haven't purchased it this year, consider purchasing it again. It does go a really long way in terms of us continuing to do what we do here, especially if you enjoyed the content. So if you can't do that, please, wherever you listen to the podcast, rate, review, subscribe. That helps us out as well. So let's get into it. Final rankings. We've been talking rankings of these guys since August. And we did ranking shows in August, and we've updated rankings, and we've talked about tiers and ranked them within tiers. But there's been a little tweaks here or there since I did my tier shows, and we're just going to kind of group it together. It's going to be a shorter episode, not going to go into a lot of insight in terms of strengths and weaknesses of the prospects. You have tons of episodes. Go back and listen to the Tier Buster episodes. That's really where I talked about, I did a tier episode for each position where I really dug into the prospects more, talked about their strengths, some areas I want to see improvement on, stuff like that. So we're going to go through the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends today. Just kind of where my final rankings lie going in to the 2024 NFL draft. So let's start right at the quarterback position. First, here are my rankings, and then I'll talk a little bit about them. Number 1 is Caleb Williams out of USC. Number 2 is Jaden Daniels out of LSU. Number 3 is Drake May out of UNC. Number 4 is JJ McCarthy out of Michigan. Number 5 is Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington. Number 6 is Bo Nix out of Oregon. Number 7 is Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. Number 8 is Jordan Travis out of Florida State. Number 9 is Joe Milton out of Tennessee. Number 10 is Michael Pratt out of Tulane. Number 11 is Devin Leary out of Kentucky. Number 12 is Sam Hartman out of Notre Dame. And number 13 is Caden Slovis out of BYU. Not any changes since I did my tier episode. Jaden Daniels, Drake May, I continue to struggle with them. I really is more of a 2A, 2B for me, but I don't really love doing the whole 2A, 2B thing. So Jaden Daniels number 2, Drake May is number 3. They are very interchangeable. I think Drake May's ceiling is higher than Jaden Daniels, but I think his floor is a little bit lower because I don't see a way that Jaden Daniels is not an effective starter at the next level with his athleticism paired with his passing pedigree. Obviously, the ceiling is a Lamar Jackson type player, but if that's the ceiling, I think his floor could at least be what Justin Fields offered Chicago. I know they're moving on from him, and Justin Fields doesn't have an ideal landing spot right now long term. We'll see what happens in Pittsburgh this year. Not even going to start, but I do think there's a little bit safer floor for Jaden Daniels, but I do think the ceiling for Drake May is higher. I still look at him as a Justin Herbert-like prospect that if he can clean up some of the ball placement issues, which I think are a lot from the mechanical stuff, and the footwork, I think he could be a high-end quarterback on that Justin Herbert-like level. I think he was asked to do a lot at UNC, maybe fell into some bad habits. I think with the right coaching, right offense, right scheme, he could still be a very high-end quarterback, which is why I have both of those guys, higher than JJ McCarthy. And I actually dropped JJ McCarthy down to the next tier. I have JJ McCarthy now back in my tier with Michael Penix and Bo Nix, because as I consider the option that the Giants are very heavily interested in JJ McCarthy, I have continued to watch more film. And there are things to like about JJ McCarthy. He's athletic. He can move around a little bit. He's got some really impressive throws when he's on the move. He's really good at, hitting them on the crossers and the slants. But I still have question marks about JJ McCarthy. I still think his ceiling is Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, more physically gifted Brock Purdy. But I still think that's where his ceiling is. I struggle putting him in the top 5, top 6, top 10 of the NFL draft, because I want to, for myself personally, I would reserve those picks for quarterbacks of guys that I think had top 5, top 7, top 8 upside in the entire NFL. I don't see that from JJ McCarthy. I could see it from Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May if they hit that ceiling. I just struggle with JJ McCarthy in terms of the ceiling. I think he's probably going to be a very good starter at the next level. He's very young. There's things to like about his game, but I never watched him in Michigan and came away thinking that guy is a guy who's going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL that can battle out, Patrick Mahomes in January or in February. I don't come across that. He wasn't asked to do a lot down 9. Can you go out there and throw the ball 20 times in the fourth quarter to get your team back in the game? We didn't see it. We didn't see it enough. We didn't see enough consistency to know if he can do that. He had a great offensive line, great run game, pass catchers, great defense, great coach. Like, there's a lot of things in his favor. So maybe he can, and maybe I'll look foolish if thinking his ceiling is that Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Brock Purdy level. I want to shoot for higher than that, which is why I think he belongs more at Michael Penix and Bo Nix, who I think could become functional starters. And maybe J.J. McCarthy's ceiling is a little higher, a little younger, but I think I put him more in that boat than I do the Caleb Williams, Jane Daniels, and Drake May. Spencer Rattler's a little bit of a wild card, especially, considering once upon a time he was thought of as maybe a first overall pick in the draft. So he's an interesting guy on round 3. If I'm talking day 3, I'll take the gamble on Joe Milton's upside, see if he can harness it and develop it. Let's take this at a running back position, share my rankings at the running back position. Number 1 is Trey Benson out of Florida State. Number 2 is Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. Number 3 is Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. Number 4 is Blake Corum out of Michigan. Number 5 is Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. Number 6 is Tyrone Tracy Jr. out of Purdue. Number 7 is Will Shipley out of Clemson. Number 8 is Ray Davis out of Kentucky. Number 9 is Isaac Arendo out of Louisville. Number 10 is Audric Estime out of Notre Dame. Number 11 is Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin. Number 12 is Bucky Irvin out of Oregon. Number 13 is Rashid Ali out of Marshall. Number 14 is Dylan Lobb out of New Hampshire. Number 15 is Blake Watson out of Memphis. Number 16 is Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. Number 17 is Cody Schrader out of Missouri. Followed up at number 18 with Kamani Vidal out of Troy. Number 19, Jace McClellan out of Alabama. And then I'll stop there. Number 20, Frank Gore Jr. out of Southern Mississippi. Guys, after that, just some more names. Keldon Milton, Jaden Sheridan out of Monmouth, Carson Steele out of UCLA, Mayan Williams out of Ohio State, Aiden Robbins out of BYU, and John Emery out of LSU. So some things about my running back rankings. A little bit's changed here or there, but not too much since the Tier Buster show. I continue to have Trey Benson as my number 1 guy. I think him and Jonathan Brooks are my 2 guys that I think I'd be comfortable taking in the second round. I think the rest of the next group of guys are more like round 3 guys before we get to the day 3 guys. I do think Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks with Jalen Wright probably have the highest ceiling in terms of the 3 prospects. I think they probably have the best chance to be 3 down players at the next level and impact the game in terms of a runner and a receiver. I do prefer Benson slightly to Brooks. That's not the torn ACL thing. It's just the contact balance, the ability to make people miss in short spaces. I think I prefer Trey Benson in that regard, and I think he plays a little bit more up to his size than Jonathan Brooks does. But I think Jonathan Brooks is a very good back, doesn't have a lot of wear and tear. I think there's some inconsistent vision and patience, but I think that's as natural as a guy who didn't play a lot prior to this year, especially with Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson there. He was playing behind those guys. In that next wave of guys, I do prefer Jalen Wright to Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd's got some ball security issues. I think Jalen Wright's a little bit more explosive, but I do like Marshawn Lloyd a lot as well. Blake Corum, I think, is rock solid. I've comped him to Doug Martin. I've seen people say Ray Rice. I think that's the type of player we're talking about. Blake Corum, not an explosive guy, not a great pass catcher, but really great vision. Guy who's going to keep the chains moving, be a very functional, very solid, starting running back at the next level. When we get to that next wave, guys, I'm going to continue to harp on Tyrone Tracy Jr. out of Purdue. Versatile player who I think his deployment and usage will be very much like an Alvin Kamara, early career Alvin Kamara, on a lesser scale, Antonio Gibson. But I like the explosiveness there, some inconsistent vision, but I think that can still develop with more time. I'm a Will Shipley guy. I think the Clemson being down the last couple of years really hurt his stock a little bit in terms of the public conception. But I think he's another guy who could impact the game in a variety of ways. Really good receiving back, but I think could also handle the workload as a rusher in that 10 to 12 type of carries a week as well. I'm higher on Isaac Arendo. Most people don't have Garendo ahead of Audric Estime and Braylon Allen. I'm intrigued with the measurables and the athletic testing of Isaac Arendo, and I think he put on some good tape this year as well. A guy that size who can run the speed he has. Garendo's a guy who really intrigues me. I've continued to harp on Braylon Allen. I struggle with him. I'll see what kind of draft capital he has. I think he's a guy who builds up some speed. Yeah, doesn't always play up to his size in terms of the physicality and stuff like that, where you would like to see a guy at 230 just barreling people over in college. So we'll see, if he's not doing that in college, it's hard to envision it as a consistent part of his game at the NFL. But we'll see. Once upon a time, very young prospect, dominated college football his first couple of years. This year, battled a little injury, drastic shift in the Wisconsin offense. I think hindered his numbers a little bit this year, but I still think he's more of a round 4 guy. Same thing with Bucky Irving. I think Bucky Irving's got to take the path of like a Kyron Williams, kind of got to get in the perfect landing spot and outplay, the pre-draft process a little bit. That hasn't been too kind, but I still think in terms of his receiving capabilities, being quicker than fast, I think that could help out Bucky Irving. The next wave of guys, I still like Rasheen Ali a lot. 3-down skill set, really good receiver. Dylan Lobb, the comparisons to Danny Woodhead have been out there all pre-draft process, and they're a fitting comp. So, I could see that really dynamite pass catcher out of the backfield. I'm intrigued by guys that have special skill sets. So a guy like Rasheen Ali, a guy like Dylan Lobb, those guys intrigue me more than the Isaiah Davises or the Cody Schraders or the Kamani Vidals, even though Kamani Vidal, great pass protector, one of the best pass protectors in the class. But I like the guys that I think, if you're talking about guys on round 5, round 6, round 7, I kind of want them to have a skill, like a calling card. And that's why guys like Ali and Dylan Lobb intrigue me. And even a guy like Blake Watson, who I think has got a 3-down skill set, intrigues me a little bit more than more well-known names like Schrader and Isaiah Davis or Jason McClellan or Kendall Milton. So that's kind of the guys that round out my top 20 in that mid, teen, 13 to 15 range. I'm intrigued by those guys for sure. Let's take this over to the wide receivers. Obviously, a stacked wide receiver class. Why don't we do this in groups? Because there's so many guys I could talk about. So let's talk about my top 10 for a little bit. Number 1 is Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. Number 2 is Malik Nabers out of LSU. Number 3 is Rome Odunze out of Washington. Number 4 is Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. Number 5 is A.D. Mitchell out of Texas. Number 6 is Xavier Worthy out of Texas. Number 7 is Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. Number 8 is Ricky Purcell out of Florida. Number 9 is Keon Coleman out of Florida State. And number 10 is Troy Franklin out of Oregon. I don't think there's a lot of surprises in that top 10. I think probably the biggest surprise is me still having Keon Coleman in there when many people are down on him. Keon Coleman is one of those guys we've talked a lot about. I think people have a little bit of a blind spot when it comes to Keon Coleman. They want to blindly compare him to a Quentin Johnston or an N'Keal Harry who failed. But I think Keon Coleman's play speed is way better than those two guys. I think his ball skills are better than those two guys. I think his contested catch ability and his ability to make acrobatic catches are better than those two guys. I think he's much more T. Higgins or Mike Williams than I do, N'Keal Harry or Quentin Johnston. So I think Keon Coleman being in my top 10, and to be honest with you, he could even be as high as 7, I think, or 6. I think that's his upside there, but it's a very close-knit group. Very hard to rank Nabers and Odunze. That's kind of like I said about the quarterback with Daniels and May being a 2A, 2B. Kind of the same thing for wide receivers. But again, I don't love doing the 2A, 2B and then dropping the 4. So I put Nabers at 2. I put Odunze at 3. For me, it's a ceiling thing for this. I think Nabers' ceiling is a little bit higher. I think Odunze's floor is higher, but I think Nabers' ceiling is higher. But I think both of these guys, true alpha wide receivers, whether you want to say Nabers reminds people of Odell or, Antonio Brown, I think that's warranted. If you want to say Rome Odunze, brings back memories of Larry Fitzgerald or Devontae Adams, I think that is warranted. So we're talking about those guys that most years would be the number 1 wide receiver in a draft class. And now they're both not even number 1 this year, or number 2 and number 3 because of how special of a prospect Marvin Harrison is. I do think it is a very significant drop off in terms of tiers after that. I like Brian Thomas and A.D. Mitchell's game, but they're a little bit more raw, a little bit more unrefined, development needed. They could develop into number 1s, but they could also just be number 2s. But there's a lot of refinement still for both of those guys. Brian Thomas was a late bloomer this year, really burst onto the scene. Same thing with A.D. Mitchell. A.D. Mitchell, definitely some route refinement and stuff that's got to be corrected. Doesn't always play up to that time speed, but a lot of upside to those guys. But I think the floor is a lot lower and that's why for me, they're a significant tier behind, Harris, Neighbors, and Odunze. I think in that same tier with Thomas and Mitchell, you could put Xavier Worthy. He's got that calling card. Obviously, the size and the frame is a little bit of a concern, but we've seen guys like Tank Dell burst onto the scene last year. We've seen other small guys have a major impact. I think the game is changing. So I think Xavier Worthy is not just a burner. He can run routes. I think he's very similar to Hollywood Brown. That's been my comp for him since last summer. So I think he can bring a lot to an offense. In terms of the next rest of my top 10, Ladd McConkey, Ricky Purcell, I think people are going to pigeonhole them to be slot onlys, but they're really not. Purcell could definitely be a guy that can play on the outside. He's got some Chris Olave to his game. I think Ladd McConkey's got inside-outside versatility. I think they're both probably at their best inside in the slot, but they are not guys that are just chain-moving slot guys. These are big play guys with explosiveness to their game. Troy Franklin, while he's got the frame of a slot guy, the body, the size screams outside. He's another vertical component. He can play inside or outside. Those are my top 10. If we take this through 11 through 20, 11 is Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. 12 is Roman Wilson out of Michigan. 13 is Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina. 14 is Jalen Polk out of Washington. 15 is Devontae Walker out of UNC. 16 is Aniyah Smith out of Texas A&M. 17 is Malik Washington out of Virginia. 18 is Jermaine Burton out of Alabama. 19 is Javon Baker out of UCF. And 20 is Jalen McMillan out of Washington. Things that stand out there. Corley and Roman Wilson, that slot guys. Corley much more the play strength, physicality after the catch guy. Roman Wilson much more the route runner type, but both add explosiveness. Xavier Leggett, I think, could go much higher than this. He's got a chance to be a surprise first rounder. Monster final season there at South Carolina, burst onto the scene, size, physicality, straight line athleticism, a lot to like about Xavier Leggett. Jalen Polk, maybe never going to be a true number one, but I think he could be a rock solid number two guy. Great body control and ball skills. Devontae Walker, a lot of upside, a lot of ceiling, but a lot of refinement. So I talked about refinement needed for Brian Thomas and AD Mitchell. That's the round one guys like that. I think Devontae Walker is the day two guy, probably now in round three because of how strong this draft class is, but he still has got that straight line speed. He's got the size, he's got the ball skills, but a lot of refinement needed to his game. And then I really like Aniyah Smith. We talked about him with Matt Wallman. He's one of my favorites in this class. I think he could run routes, but I also think he could be a versatile, dynamic offensive weapon. His after the catch stuff is very Kadarius Toney-like. Best movement skills of anybody in this entire draft class, I think, in terms of making you miss, bouncing off people. I love his return, rushing, receiving, trifecta package that he brings to an offense. But I think he's a much better and more refined route runner than people give him credit for. So I think he's going to be a real interesting steal for a team somewhere on day three. Malik Washington, another late riser in the process, explosive, vertical slot guy, can do a lot. And then Jermaine Burton and Javon Baker, their talent screams early round two. Some other concerns with them might push them down the board a lot, but this is such a strong draft class that I couldn't even get them in my rankings until 18 or 19, but I both like their games. Very intrigued by both their skill sets. Jalen McMillan, another guy, really crafty route runner, part of that trifecta of wide receivers at Washington. So Jalen McMillan, I think all of these guys I just talked about all weren't going in the first top 100 picks. I don't think we're going to get 20. I think we're going to get 16, maybe 17 at the most. But I think all of them have top 100, talent and skill level. And then let's round out the rest. My next top 10. I mean, I have rankings all the way down to almost 40 at the wide receiver position. You can check out the notebooks to get the rest of them. But 21, Brendan Rice out of USC. 22, Anthony Gould out of Oregon State. 23, Johnny Wilson out of Florida State. 24, Jacob Cowan out of Arizona. 25, Taj Washington out of USC. 26, Jamari Parrish out of Louisville. 27, Luke McCaffrey out of Rice. 28, Latatroy Griffin out of Mississippi State. 29, Isaiah Williams out of Illinois. And 30, Bub Means out of Pittsburgh. Those guys in that group, Anthony Gould, you're talking about the speedster, the burner, guy who can get vertical. Brendan Rice, tough, physical, good route runner, gets off press well, very savvy, obviously son of Jerry Rice. Jacob Cowan, he's going to be like very Tank Dell-ish, but more, very small guy, but explosive. I think people are going to be surprised that the NFL likes him as much as they do. I feel like people understand how great he was in college and how explosive, but I think the NFL is going to take a shot on him in round 4. Johnny Wilson, really intriguing. I have him here for my wide receiver ranks, but I also have him in my top 5 tight end ranks, where I think some NFL teams are going to value him. But even as a wide receiver, I think he's an early day wide receiver prospect, especially if he can clean up some of his drops. Jamari Parash, I think, is a Darnell Mooney type prospect. Taj Washington, another explosive vertical slot player. A lot to like in this 21 to 30 tier. A lot of Trick Griffin, explosive, vertical, slot player as well. Luke McCaffrey, great movement skills from Luke McCaffrey, good route runner. So much to like in this group here, from 21 through 30, really strong wide receiver group. I mean, I have it all the way down to like 27 of guys that I think are round 4 or earlier worthy. That's 27 guys I think I have a round 4 grade or higher on. That is an insane number of guys. They're not all going to go in the first 4 rounds. Some probably will fall to round 5, but I think it just speaks volumes on how talented this class is for sure. And let's round it out with the tight end ranks for today. Number 1 in the tight end is Brock Bowers out of Georgia. Number 2 is Tavian Sanders out of Texas. Number 3 is Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State. Number 4 is Theo Johnson out of Penn State. Number 5 is Johnny Wilson out of Florida State. Number 6 is Cade Stover out of Ohio State. Number 7 is Jared Wiley out of TCU. Number 8 is Eric All out of Iowa. Number 9 is Jaheim Bell out of Florida State. Number 10 is Tip Raymond out of Illinois. Number 11 is Tanner McLaughlin out of Arizona. Number 12 is Dallin Holker out of Colorado State. Number 13 is AJ Barner out of Michigan. Number 14 is Devin Culp out of Washington. And I'm going to stop at 15, McCall Castles out of Tennessee. Obviously, we've talked a ton about Brock Bowers. He's the clear first round, top 15-ish prospect in this draft class. The upside of a TJ Hawkinson, maybe even higher than Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts had more natural ability and upside coming out, but I think the floor is significantly higher for Brock Bowers, who's got a little bit more versatility to his game. After that, I think it's a big teardrop to the next group of guys is kind of all bunched together with Jatavian Sanders, Ben Sinnott, Theo Johnson, Johnny Wilson, Cade Stover, Jared Wiley. I think they're all guys that can go somewhere in round 3 to the early portion or mid portion of round 4. I think Ben Sinnott has been one of my favorites in the process. Just since the summer started, since last summer, I liked him all year. I talked about him on the recap shows. Focal point of that K-State offense, very versatile, gives us all blocking, but also good route runner. Picks up yards after the catch. A lot to like about Ben Sinnott. Jatavian Sanders, I keep saying he's a lot, like Isaiah Likely. I think his play speed is significantly better than his time speed. And I think we're going to see that in the NFL. Theo Johnson, ceiling might be the second highest in this class after Brock Bowers. Great athletic tester, special athlete in terms of the history of athletic testing. Wasn't asked to be a huge part of that pass offense, but I think it's in his repertoire. So really intrigued by Theo Johnson. Johnny Wilson, if you listen to the last episode, David Syvertson talked about very much a Darren Waller clone. Remember, Darren Waller was a wide receiver in college at Georgia Tech that shifted over eventually to tight end. I think Johnny Wilson could be that style of player in terms of what he can offer. Not going to be much in terms of blocking, but if he's lined up, and gets the mismatches that a lot of times tight ends gets, Johnny Wilson could be a very effective weapon at the next level. Cade Stover, very just solid starting functional upside tight end. Maybe start as a depth or a backup tight end too, but I think could work his way in this to a solid starter. Same thing with Jared Wiley, a little bit more upside, pass catching maybe than Cade Stover, but a lot to like there. Eric All, I mean, if he was fully healthy, you're talking about a guy who probably would be my number 5 tight end, just in terms of his upside, his ceiling case, a guy who could stretch and attack the seam. A lot to like about him. Tip Ryman tested out as a great athlete who's a great blocker. We'll see if the passing, can come along, and that could be a surprise of him at the next level. I like taking a chance on guys like that. Tanner McLaughlin out of Arizona, interesting pass catching tight end as well. And then Jaheim Bell, again, I've compared him a lot to Chiga Okonkwo. Very versatile player. I know fantasy points guys really are high on him. There's a lot to like about Jaheim Bell. If he gets with the right coach, right scheme that knows how to utilize and maximize the skill set, I think he can be very effective at the next level. So there it is, guys. My final quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end rankings for the 2024 NFL Draft. As I talked about at the top of the show, the Draft Projections Notebook is now live. You can get all 3 notebooks for $9.99. Get over to the website, SS Football, fastest and easiest way to get there. And please consider purchasing it to significantly help us continue to do what we do here. So remember, on my guys episode still to come before the 2024 NFL Draft, and my predicting the draft, how I think it's going to unfold. Round 1, top 100. Talk about all the guys I think are going to come off the board in the first couple rounds of the NFL Draft. Both of those podcasts will drop wherever you listen to podcasts and on the YouTube channel prior to the NFL Draft as well. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.